Let's tackle a question of world history. The question is, analyze the impact of industrialization on 19th century European society. Discuss economic, social, and political consequences with supporting examples. How do we answer this question? We'll first discuss what is industrialization. Industrialization, which is also known as the Industrial Revolution, refers to a series of inventions in England in the last quarter of the 18th century, which improved and accelerated the process of manufacturing, initially in cotton industry and later for other commodities such as iron. This new industrial production was characterized by large scale production in dedicated factories which concentrated labor and machines. Machines that were powered by steam. The factory based industrial production flooded the markets with the new industrial goods. They outcompeted in costs the localized, distributed, small scale production in cottage industries, which was a mark of productive economy all over the world before industrialization. The resulting changes were not gradual but revolutionary in nature, and hence, in 19th century, scholar Arnold Toynbee termed these changes the Industrial Revolution. Toynbee emphasized that there was a qualitative rupture between pre industrial and industrial society, as mechanization, factory system, and capitalist ownership fundamentally changed social relations rather than accelerating existing trends. While historians such as T.S. Ashton emphasized gradualism and continuity, other economic historians count industrialization as one of the most important events in human history, on par with the start of agriculture that had marked the Neolithic Revolution 10,000 years ago, laying the foundation of modern sedentary life and civilization as we know it. Eric Hobsbawm famously described the Industrial Revolution as the most fundamental transformation of human life in the history of the world recorded in written documents. Industrialization achieved massive increase in output through the immense productive capacity of the steam engine and later electricity, which replaced the limited capacity of manual labor, the most vital consequence of industrialization, holding in it the seeds of major economic, social, and political consequences that continue to shape the trajectory of human history. Industrialization had a global aspect built into it from the very start. As per historian Irfan Habib, early industrialization led to the domination of British industries over the legacy industries of the Old World, causing deindustrialization in places such as India, reordering global economic hierarchy. Industrialization made England the leading economy of the world and turned the world, and especially the British Empire, into a market for British goods. The British Empire acted like a vast trading empire spread across the Atlantic and the Indian Ocean. It was a subject of envy for all the European countries who wanted to replicate the success of the British. Gradually, as the 19th century went on, industrialization's effects as well as industrialization itself spread out across Europe, thoroughly affecting the continent's social, economic, and political trajectory. Let's first look at the various economic consequences of industrialization. Number one, the transformation of labor relations and the rise of factory system. In pre-industrial economy, production was based out of households, also known as cottage industry. Artisans relied on hereditary skills, worked as a community. Family often formed the unit of labor. They retained autonomy over their work rhythm, despite feudal oppression. But in industrial mode of production, As per E.P. Thompson, there was a cultural shift that entailed imposing a time discipline on industrial workers. It heralded a shift in attitude towards labor, punctuality, and productivity. The independent producers from traditional sectors such as handlooms, metal crafts were converted into wage laborers or proletarians who were dependent on and disciplined by the factory employment. Economic consequence number two: de-skilling of labor with increasing mechanization. Replacement of manual labor by machines was the defining feature of industrialization. Starting with the textile sector, new wave of inventions such as the spinning jenny, water frame, and power loom boosted productivity by leaps and bounds. As per David Landis, successive innovations in mechanization breached the constraints imposed by human muscle power. In this context, the improvements by James Watt in harnessing of steam power created a decisive shift in productivity through automation. Factory system grew in strength through concentration of capital in steam power and machines, further enabling scale. So, as per Harry Braverman, the change that happened due to mechanization was this: the skills that were key to production were embedded no more in workers but in machines, leading to de-skilling of labor. The third economic consequence: transport revolution, which created an early form of globalization. Large scale production of goods required a commensurate improvement, if not creation, of a vast transport network to move the factory produced goods to markets for sale. There was expansion of canals, railways, steamships, and port infrastructure, which reduced the cost and time of moving goods and people. As per Hobsbawm, in the 19th century, from Britain to Germany, railways were seen as the most visible symbol of industrial power and economic integration. It formed the backbone of industrial economy through integration of markets and facilitation of large-scale distribution. These developments made the world look smaller and laid the foundation of modern globalization, establishing links between European industries and global sources of raw materials and overseas markets. Next economic consequence of industrialization was improved well-being due to rapid economic growth. With industrialization and its sweeping gains of markets around the globe, there was unprecedented economic growth. As for Ashton, despite some hardships, national incomes increased, average living standards improved, and long term prices reduced through increased availability of industrial goods. However, there were regional variations. While Britain and parts of Western Europe gained materially from industrialization, Eastern and Southern Europe remained out of the ambit of any industrial revolution. Now, the next economic consequence: inequality and capital labor conflict. Industrialization took place through concentrated ownership of industrial capital, that is, the means of production, and resulted in rapid rise in the fortune of capitalists through concentration of profits. The wage laborers, on the other hand, struggled to ensure decent living conditions. So, what we had before us was a society marked by stark inequalities. There was prodigious growth in wealth, but it was not balanced by a scheme for equitable distribution of its benefits. So, as per Karl Marx, capitalism systematically extracted surplus value from labor and concentrated it as wealth for the bourgeois and eventually delivered misery for the proletariat. As a result, we see recurrent capital labor conflicts marked by strikes, labor unrest, and riots. These were the economic consequences. Now, let's look at the social consequences of industrialization. Number one, population explosion. As a result of industrialization, there was a dramatic rise in population of Europe. The reasons were improved food availability and declining mortality. As per E.A. Wrigley, industrial economies were able to break through the traditional Malthusian cycle, removing a critical constraint that had limited population growth till that time in history. Second social consequence was urbanization. Industrial cities expanded rapidly with industrialization and emerged as the major hotspots of population expansion. However, urbanization created new social problems as well, as housing and sanitation were seldom adequate. There was increase in slums as cities spread out as urban sprawls, marked by a gloomy air of disease and crime. Third social consequence, the emergence of the working class. Industrialization yielded a distinct class of industrial workers with shared experiences and common grievances. There were increasing incidents of social unrest, strikes, and trade union activities, which drew upon the rising consciousness of the problems of industrial society and the inspiration of the French Revolution to challenge class privileges. As per E.P. Thompson, there was a working class consciousness which was a product of struggle, organization, and consciousness of its own self in the new industrial world. The fourth social consequence of industrialization, increased awareness of labor conditions. Grim social realities of the times were reflected in contemporary literature. Charles Dickens, for example, vividly captured the gloom of the industrial town in his novels and stories, describing child labor, poverty, and urban misery. Thus, he not only pictured but also shaped contemporary social perception of industrialization. His literary works, such as Oliver Twist, which was published between 1837 to 1839, acted as a social commentary on the contemporary industrial society in Britain. Charles Dickens' influence can be gauged from the fact that his readership ranged across pickpockets of Manchester to Queen Victoria. There was thus an awakened consciousness in society about the problems and conditions of laboring classes, of men, women, and children, as the Industrial Revolution progressed. The fifth social consequence of industrialization was the rise of socialism. Socialism emerged out of an awareness of the problems of industrial workers and the need to improve their lot. Socialists sought to address exploitation, inequality, and alienation that was inherent in the factory system of industrialization. They responded to perceived injustices of industrial capitalism in varying ways across time and space. They demanded and lobbied for political and social reforms. The Chartist movement in Britain, for example, in 1830s and 40s called for political inclusion, labor rights, and social justice. Social legislation followed as a result in form of factory acts, labor regulations, and welfare measures, hence marking the start of modern social state. Next social consequence of industrialization is the changing position of women. Industrialization brought women into factory work. Women's increased involvement In industrial environment, such as in textile mills, often involved exploitation, but at the same time, it also disrupted traditional gender roles. Gradually, the industrial society paved way for women's access for paid employment, political activism, and access to education. This marked the start of early feminist movement. In a study of modern Europe and the world, Al-Mukherjee states, industrialization resulted in improvements in position of women, giving them full civic rights as they captured positions hitherto reserved for men. The seventh social consequence of industrialization was the expansion of education. The requirements of industrial economies entailed a literate and disciplined workforce. The corollary of the demanding industrial work was that elementary education was no more the monopoly of the upper classes and elites. Access to education profoundly altered social mobility pathways and raised political awareness. Now we move to discuss the political consequences of industrialization in 19th century Europe. The first one is rise of nationalism. Industrialization provided a robust foundation for nationalism. How? Industrial society enabled economic integration, centralized administration, and recruitment of mass armies. The industrial and military strength was the key, for example, to German unification under Prussia, which was facilitated by Bismarck's policy of blood and iron, laying bare the intimate link between industrial capacity and political power. Second political consequence was imperialism. Industrialization acted as the driving force behind imperialist ambitions of European states. In the late 19th century, a phase which is also known as the period of new imperialism, the need to capture markets and cheap factors of production in pursuit of industrial growth pushed European powers into a competition to capture territories. El Mukherjee states that imperialism became the inspiration behind every ambitious state. But, as per Hobsbawm, the 19th century imperialism was less about national glory and more about the economic necessity that was rooted in the times of industrial capitalism. Think about this. New imperialism was rooted in the times of industrial capitalism. Comment. Can you answer this question? Post your answer in the comment section and I will review the answer for you. Industrial contestation for raw materials intensified international rivalries among European states in what is known as the scramble for Africa. At the Berlin Conference of 1884-85, the industrial powers of Europe, in order to avoid confrontation among themselves, carried out a paper partition of Africa. What is paper partition? A partition of territories that happened on paper as an understanding through recognition of territorial claims of each other. European powers distributed and allocated African territories as occupation zones and spheres of influence, with complete disregard to indigenous sovereignty in interest of colonization. The fourth political consequence of industrialization is the interventionist state. Industrial societies increasingly started relying on interventionist state in place of laissez-faire policies. There were demands from the working classes for social protection and welfare measures to protect the poor against the excesses of the capitalist system. It resulted in social legislation and welfare interventions. At the same time, Industries also demanded and relied on reliefs that required states' involvement, such as the creation of Zollverein, which was a German customs union by Prussia in 1834, and the petitioning by free traders, utilitarians, liberals, and missionaries, etc., to the British Crown to end the monopoly of the East India Company in trade with India and China. The fifth political consequence of industrialization was the rise of international socialism. While early utopian socialist thinkers bestowed faith in benevolence of the industrial state, Marxists and anarchists advocated radical measures for organization of the working class. Internationalist movements in form of International Working Men's Association, or the First International in 1864 and the Second International in 1889 emerged, which were predecessors to spread of communist revolutions in 20th century. To summarize the effects of industrialization in 19th century Europe, we can conclude that industrialization brought about a complete transformation of Europe in the 19th century. The economic transformation was accompanied and often driven by social and political changes. The new industrial age was witness to unprecedented urbanization, formation of class identity, ideological conflicts, imperial expansion, and the rise of modern welfare state. That's all the learning for today. Stay tuned and subscribe to the channel to learn more of such topics in thorough detail. If you have doubts or if you want me to explain a topic of your choice, write down to us in the comment section. Press the bell icon so that you never miss an update. Thank you.